Hello everyone, my name is Seth and I'm the Membership Engagement Officer here at the EAUC. Welcome to today's EAUC webinar. The title of this webinar is a Living Labs Dialogue, and this is the first in the series of 3 webinars which are part of the national project we have launched in Living Labs to explore the concepts and to improve sustainability on campuses and in communities. The webinar will last approximately 90 minutes. Thank you for registering, and thanks also to Hassan, Emily Dunning from the University of Cambridge, who is also the Living Labs convener, and Dave Gorman, Director of Sustainability and Responsibility at the University of Edinburgh, who will be leading this webinar. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me well. For the time being, I've placed all of your microphones on mute to avoid any background noise. After we've heard from Hassan, Emily and Dave, there'll be some time for an open discussion and Q&A. When we have this time, please unmute your microphones by clicking the microphone button to the right-hand side of your name at the top of the right of the screen. If you don't have a working microphone, please type any questions or comments you have into the on-screen chat box, which can be found at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you have any technical issues at all during this webinar, please let me know by posting into this chat box or emailing me on the email address on the opening slide. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the EAUC's website later on today. Please feel free to share the resources with any colleagues or fellow EAUC members. Once this webinar is finished, you'll be sent a short survey for us to gain your feedback. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey, as the results will help us improve our CPD and events. That's all from me for now. I'll now pass you over to Hassan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Seth. Is it possible, Seth, to pass on the, or Emily, could you please click forward, because I don't think I have the ability to. Oh, that's great, thanks. I'm the Living Labs project coordinator, and we are currently carrying on Phase 1, which is planned to end in December, and this project has been split up into 2 main parts. This is just one slide I have here to explain this, and then I'll pass on to Emily and Dave. So the left-hand side is the research, and the idea behind that is to establish a strong background, a strong foundation for this research project to carry on to implementation in the next phase. So hopefully in December we will have an output, and on the right hand side you'll see a series of things that we intend to do to engage with our members. So I'll take you through the research firstly. So it will comprise of a literature review, and looking at international and national case studies, which is currently going on, and I'm looking into those right now. Hopefully within the next couple of months, that phase will move on to perhaps an interview phase, but we have to weigh up the kind of time costs versus the benefit to see if it will be worth having a series of interviews with potential case studies which will feature in this research. Case studies of interest, of importance, institutions which have demonstrated progress in key parts of living labs across the world. And then finally, we'll have an analysis phase, kind of. I'll be looking to draw everything together, all the theory, all the practice, all the case studies, and finally publish practical toolkits. So the idea behind this research is not to just have a report, but to have some sort of a toolkit that institutions can easily understand, communicate, and practically implement in their own contexts as well. So that all of that will be supplemented by the engagement plan, and this is mainly to try to get institutions feeding into the research itself, as well as think about the ongoing implications and the future of the Living Labs project. So as Seth mentioned earlier on, we plan on having 3 webinars. Seth will mention in detail the second webinar, which we have now planned with Professor John Robinson. He'll be talking about his latest ventures in Copenhagen Business School and the University of Toronto after he left UBC. And I'll also be using 5 to 10 minutes at the start of each webinar to update the community of practice on exactly what's going on with the research, just so everyone is aware of where this research project is on that point. And after this webinar, I will plan to send out everyone an output survey. Essentially, this will be a survey which will intend to gauge you in the research outputs themselves to try to understand from our perspective what would help you most from this research, what kind of tools or what kind of environments or challenges you're facing, and what tools would help you overcome those barriers or challenges. And then I'll hopefully be looking to have a couple of presentations of work in progress, either structures, documents, drafts, or anything which I have in hopefully November time, October, November time, a couple of things which I'll be using the community of practice for. If you haven't joined it, it would be great if you could join it. You just have to email info@eauc.org.uk, and more details at the end as well. So I'll be using the community of practice as a sounding board, essentially, to send out some work to see what you think, get some feedback on it, and improve it before the final output is released. So I don't want to put anything out there which institutions see it coming as a surprise or don't really have any input into. Hopefully, we want this to be a rigorous piece of work which has been critiqued at least a couple of times and which has been fed into by many different institutions. Then we'll be looking to disseminate these outputs into, this will be public, all the outputs will be publicly available, so hopefully we'll get the research out nationally and internationally for institutions to use. There is an envisioned webinar on findings of the research, which will essentially take you through the findings themselves, have some background and explanation on those, but we already have these 3 webinars planned, so we're not quite sure if that will be too much. And there is a proposed event in January. After gauging the interest level, we thought it may be beneficial to have an event in January which brings institutions together somewhere central in the UK on living labs and really takes this forward, because hopefully by then we'll have the research published, and we'll be looking to further this project through the next phase 2, which will be geared towards implementation of living labs across institutions, and hopefully a series of pilots, which I know many of you have expressed interest in. So we'll be thinking about that towards January, and hopefully taking this into practice. And if you treat this as an ongoing consultation, I think we'll benefit most from it, because I think it will be beneficial to yourselves and to the EAUC if we treat this as an open project that we all share in, because we don't want to put anything out that will not be the best use of your time, and I'm sure you don't want to receive a piece of research or something which doesn't really apply in your context, or which you don't really think helps the sector through a particular perspective it's taken. So I think this is more about us listening to you and taking on board all the feedback and making sure that's reflected in the research. So there's my email address. I'd be grateful if you could send feedback on the webinars, send feedback on the research itself. When I put out the surveys, it would be great if you could respond, even if you have comments at this point in time in terms of what you think the research should entail, or particular avenues I should look at. Please do feel free to email me at that address. So I have another slide, and I'm not going to talk you through the slide. It's a lot of text, and it's for your leisure to look at after the webinar. And this slide is it's a product of recommendation that I should have something along the lines of the benefits of Living Lab. So I essentially listed all the benefits that I have picked up so far through research or could think of. And I'll quickly skip over this slide, and we'll go straight to Emily Dunning from the University of Cambridge now. So I'll let you have a look at the slide for 5 seconds, and then maybe after the webinar, you can come back to it and have a look at the slide in your own time. Okay, I'll pass over to Emily.
Okay, thanks Hassan, and hi everybody. It's really nice to be part of this and actually start the conversations and discussions with anyone else who's got Living Labs or thinking about Living Labs, that kind of thing. I guess I've got the privilege of speaking about our own Living Lab at Cambridge today because of being the convener of the community of practice with EAUC, but I'm really particularly excited about getting into the discussion afterwards. But hopefully this will stimulate some thoughts from you and yeah, to be able to share kind of where we're at with our journey with our Living Lab. So I've got 10 minutes. I'm going to try and briefly cover what our journey has been so far, what some of our outcomes have been to date, how it currently works, what some of our successes and benefits of having a Living Lab have been, spend a bit of time talking about the challenges of that. I think that's the most important thing in a way for EAUC people to be discussing, because that's where it gets most useful to be talking about this, and then talking about our future plans. So the Living Lab in Cambridge, the concept came here through a student internship, which was funded by Santander Universities back in 2010. An engineering student who was interning here with the team, and then in 2011, this got turned into a formal 3-year funding proposal, which was submitted to Santander, and then that got accepted, and sort of with a commitment to fund £50,000 a year. So in 2012, programme delivery began with a Living Lab coordinator recruited, which wasn't me. I joined last year, so I've been in the role a year now, and project development kind of came on from there. When it got to 2014 and that first 3 years was up, conversations were had with Santander, and that funding was extended for another 3 years until May 2017. So I'm going to be thinking sometime soon about what's next and whether we can develop it further or extend the funding again, that kind of thing. In terms of activity to date, it was quite good having to put this presentation together because it made me look back on the whole of everything that's happened so far, not just the last year. There have been 62 projects undertaken so far with the support of the Living Lab, which has involved about 123 students and a further 570 who may have not been doing a project directly, but they've attended a course that was supported by the Living Lab or attended an event that was supported by the Living Lab. And if you want to find out more about all of those activities and projects, you can find the previous annual reports at that link. You'll have the slides afterwards, so you can go back to that. But that's probably the best, that gives you the best detail about what the specifics of some of the projects that have been done and that kind of thing. In terms of how our Living Lab works, we've kind of got 3 main areas that we're thinking about all the time with its aims. So one of them is to contribute to improving the environmental sustainability of the University of Cambridge. And that's as part of, I'm in the wider team of the Environment and Energy section based within estate management here. So I'm always thinking about what our policy says and what our targets are and where I can help support projects to happen that will contribute towards those aims. We're trying to foster innovation and encourage the testing and researching of different aspects of sustainability, making use of the university estate or having it as a case study, providing data so that people can analyse it and make suggestions and recommendations for improvements, that kind of thing. And really draw on sort of the research and the academic talent that's here. And then the third main aim is around education. So it's about enhancing students' educational experience and their opportunities for applying their knowledge. And that hopefully brings it to life for them a lot more and helps them feel like they can actually make a change while they're here studying at university. One of the things that motivates me the most in this area of work is the fact that, you know, our students are the future leaders and the future citizens in society. That's why I love working in the university sector. So it's really exciting to me to be able to provide those opportunities. The way our Living Lab is structured, and I know this is different between different Living Labs, we've got 4 different areas. So I know some focus only or predominantly on academic projects, and whilst that is our core, so that's the idea of I'm supporting projects for students to undertake through their, whether it's their undergraduate degree, their master's, or their PhD thesis, using the university as a case study as a part of that. There's also various other ways that we try and get people involved as well. Because we understand that not all students can actually use the Living Lab for their project as part of their course or degree, and we don't want to then just put them off. So then the other ways are supporting any voluntary projects that are happening. So a couple of examples from last year were supporting a group of students to do some thermal imaging, where they got training on using a thermal imaging camera, and then they surveyed one of the departments in the university, and then they put forward some recommendations on improvements in energy efficiency because of those results. And then I support a summer internship scheme where we tend to have 2 or 3 current students or recent graduates join our team every year, and that's a paid scheme, which is a really great opportunity for lots of students who are wanting to get into that area. We've currently got 2 students with us actually right now, and they're doing fantastic work. And then we also have an award scheme which changes shape year on year. This coming year, we're going to be launching a competition for students and staff to put forward ideas and proposals for how to reduce carbon emissions across the university. But previously, it's been things like funding to student societies if they want to do a particular project. Another time, it's focused on working with one particular department to implement certain sustainability activities within that. So that, yeah, that's changed year on year. A project example, this is kind of the ideal scenario, I suppose, of what happens when we have a project coming through the Living Lab. So Seaman Lee she studied engineering in 2013-14, and she carried out some energy performance analysis on the Sainsbury Lab, which is the most energy intensive building across the estate. And she was looking at the gap between the designed energy performance and how it was actually in operation. And as a result of her study, that helped the building energy manager to implement changes in the building energy management system, which then resulted in a 30% reduction in energy use, which I think was an amazing achievement. And that's the ideal scenario. It doesn't always work out like that. You can't always have that follow through necessarily. But I wanted to share that as where it's worked really particularly well. I think more general successes and benefits that can come from the Living Lab are actually increasing the profile of our team overall within the university setting. I'm probably the most, I have the most to do with the academic community, you know, and actually thinking about the research side of it to link that back into our team, which is a great link to have because that ends up resulting in other opportunities. And it's providing those tangible opportunities for students is so useful for helping embed these changes that we want to see around the estate and allows it to happen in a flexible way. In terms of some of the challenges, there are many, so usually are with these different initiatives. One of the things is actually how do you measure impacts and record the outcomes, because you can't usually say because of this project this level of carbon emissions was saved or whatever it might be. It's usually that a project might be given to a particular person who's making decisions around a particular thing, and then that results in something, but you can't just say that's because of that project. And the other thing is when you look at this table here that I've got with the outcomes on it, I want to be thinking about culture change, and I want to be thinking about the student experience, and sometimes that comes from anecdotal stuff. You can't have numbers always with these sorts of things. it's the using that I kind of mentioned it before, that using the research for that practical purpose and creating that operational impact doesn't always happen. I would say we probably have about 30 to 40% of our projects where we can actually end up using the research outcomes for our operational purposes. Other times it just ends up being that it's enhanced the student experience, but maybe the sample size isn't big enough for us to then infer anything from it at that point, or something else. But it might be that then we do further research beyond that and get another project happening to build on it. I think increasing the profile and appeal more widely beyond the people who are already interested in sustainability is a challenge always, but I'm working on that by trying to engage with new and different departments. And then data is sometimes a problem. So a student might come to me asking for particular data, and we don't always have it in enough granularity or for enough time to be helpful for them. In terms of the future, I'm always thinking about trying to get more projects off the ground. As I was saying, get more departments and subject areas on board. There may be slightly less obvious ones. Architecture and engineering are our core at the moment, as well as things like land economy and geography. But I'm really keen to engage more with the likes of psychology and sociology too. I want to be doing more monitoring of impact so that we can be measuring what we're achieving and how we're going. Do more outreach within the university, which we're starting to do through engaging more on student inductions in general, and hopefully thinking about getting more funding beyond May 2017. All my contact information is here. I'd be more than happy to love to chat further beyond this webinar and beyond all of Hassan's fantastic work that he's doing. So yeah, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
I think that's my cue. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. My name is Dave Gorman. I'm Director of Social Responsibility and Sustainability at the University. I know many of you on the list, but not all. And I just want to talk you through, on behalf of Edinburgh, what we've been up to, which has some very similar themes to what Emily was just saying and Hassan at the start. So let me just see if I can get this started. So you've got me, I'm afraid, because my colleague Liz Cooper has gone on holiday, and Liz probably knows much more about some of this than I do, and Liz had kindly put some of these slides together for me. So I'm happy to take questions at the end, but let me just try and give you a flavour of what we're doing in Edinburgh. The first thing we thought was useful was to set it in context. So we have this concept of social responsibility and sustainability at the university, and as you can see from the slide, it covers quite a wide range of areas. So we talk about traditional sustainability, climate change, sustainable estates, how we run our buildings and move around, but also ideas about sustainable procurement and fair trade, and particularly an increasing focus on supply chains and asking questions about conflict minerals or child labour and labour standards and supply chains. We, just like Cambridge, try and integrate some of this into learning and teaching and research. We have been suggesting that SRS for us means issues about fair employer, and it gets you into issues about contracts and pensions, but also equality and diversity, and also widening participation and the opportunities we offer to people with lower incomes and from disadvantaged areas. It means relations with the city, it means public engagement with science, and some of you heard me speak at a previous seminar about it also means responsible investment. So it's quite wide. So I guess when we're thinking about Living Lab from our own perspective, we're thinking about it in terms of the sets of issues that are on that list. So at some stage we put together a definition that we thought worked for ourselves. So as you can see here, it's using our own academic and student research capabilities, and particularly with an idea that in future there should be less of a divide between our students and research, that our students should be researchers. So to use that capacity to solve SRS issues relating to particularly our infrastructure and our practices. So I'm very keen as a director that if I'm trying to figure out what to do about climate change, I tap into our academics but also our students to help us do that. So we would say that collaborative Living Lab projects provide answers and guidance, they really, I think, do give great opportunities for our students to demonstrate some of their skills in practice. And we also think there's definitely sort of action research opportunities for research impact for academics. So that's our working definition. Who do we collaborate with? Well, Liz Cooper runs what we call the SRS Academic Network with a couple of hundred academics in it, and it's really just those people who have expressed an interest in SRS issues generally, either because they're working on some of the topics or because they would like to get more involved with us. So they are one of our collaborators in terms of Living Labs. We're fortunate to have something called Edinburgh Living Lab, which was established by some of our academic colleagues in the School of Informatics, in something called the Institute for Design Informatics, and in Political Science, and the Institute for the Study of Science, Technology and Innovation. And the Living Lab tries to work, it partners up with the council, with the City of Edinburgh Council. It's effectively data-driven and participatory, trying to use the skills of students and academics to solve problems to do with mobility, energy and Internet of Things. So we're fortunate to have them right next to us, and we're trying to figure out how they relate to our ideas on Living Labs. Obviously, we've got students, and we've been setting up dissertation projects. We've been working on course collaborations. There are particular courses that are well suited to come and do work with ourselves. For example, the one mentioned here is Case Studies in Sustainable Development. And we, similar to what you heard from Cambridge, try and, if there is a gap, bridge that gap between operations and academics. So we try and build networks of contacts on the academic and student side, but also operationally with the state, so procurement or IT, so that we can collaborate and broker deals sometimes. This is one of Liz's slides talking about our general approach, and as you can see on the left-hand side, we move from problem identification and formation, data sharing and generation, reporting and sharing findings, implementing changes, monitoring that, and sharing that research. I won't go through all of the detail on the right-hand side, but we do try and increasingly operate across a wide range. Sometimes we're simply bringing briefings together or workshops together. Sometimes we are using reports to try and make real change in terms of renewables deployment on site. And increasingly, just to mention that last one about sharing research, we're trying to then adopt a kind of action research style for our own activities and see if we can begin to publish and present at conferences and contribute to the academic literature about some of this stuff, which I can talk about in questions if anybody's interested. A few project examples, I won't name them all, but we did a piece of work funded by Zero Waste Scotland, the Scottish Government agency, on circular economy and recycling, just looking at if you took circular economy ideas and applied them in Edinburgh, what would that mean? We got really good interaction from half a dozen schools or more: chemistry, biology, design, College of Art, and so on. So that was a really interesting project. I've mentioned Edinburgh Living Lab. We have something called Enhance, which is trying to put in place very detailed monitoring of a particular building and try and learn some lessons about behaviour change. And then one that always interests me is in the top right-hand corner, a couple of our students went to Malawi to investigate the actual impact of fair trade fair trade lentils on communities. So we thought it was really good because they needed to do dissertations. We wanted to check real progress, and we learned some real lessons about the fact that fair trade was having an impact. So I thought that was a pretty good project. In fact, we'll mention one more, which is just in the bottom right, a piece of work we did looking at what was the case for bringing in prisoners to try and rehabilitate them. And this had stemmed from us suggesting that we didn't want to undertake bonded labour, obviously, or use bonded labour, and then the prison service coming back to us and suggesting that, well, that's fine, but at the same time, rehabilitation of offenders is key, and work opportunities are key to that. So the picture there is of a seminar which was quite theoretical to start with, but turned into what we hope will be an opportunity for prisoners to come and work in the university and take some opportunities. I thought this slide was useful from Liz. It talks about the sort of roles that we've identified. Sometimes we're simply just using our connections to connect people up. They tend to find the academic side have little clue how the operational side works and vice versa. And so sometimes just getting people together and encouraging them to interact is one of our roles, just facilitating. Sometimes just coordinating, going a little bit further, identifying themes, running workshops, providing minute-taking or administration, running projects and grants. Increasingly, we're trying to move towards the right-hand side where we were initially a little bit nervous about trying to tell academic colleagues what to do, but we've begun to, I think, try and define projects and objectives, structures and timeframes, and work with people, with us having a third role, if you like, between the academic and the operational side, and also beginning to partner up. So we're hoping to land a big European project which is around supply chains. And if we do so, we'll have done it in collaboration with some academic colleagues who have real expertise on the research side, but less knowledge of the procurement system. So those are just some examples of our roles. Future plans. I was really interested to hear what Emily was saying. I think we've still got some way to go to get to where we want to be on Living Labs, but we've had feedback from our academic colleagues that we should begin to run theme meetings, and so there's a few suggested: circular economy or energy, and begin to possibly design research programs or link the teaching and research going on to operational challenges. An obvious one is climate change. We certainly intend to collaborate further with the Edinburgh Living Lab folk, with one eye to developing some sort of toolkit of measures and techniques. And we're very pleased to fund some of the EAUC Living Lab work. So we're looking forward to working with Hassan and EAUC generally, and people who are interested, to just try and shape a bit further some of the things that Hassan was talking about at the start. Hopefully that was roughly 10 minutes, and I'll hand back to Hassan. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dave. That was brilliant, and thank you, Emily, too. So me and Hassan are just going to lead sort of an open dialogue now for people to get involved and ask any questions. So if you could, before you ask a question, if you could sort of state your name and your institution, and maybe describe at what stage you're sort of at with your Living Labs, whether it's been going on for long or whether you're just looking to get started with it. So if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or type them into the chat box, and Emily, Dave and Hassan will be more than happy to respond.
Hiya, it's Sarah Lynch from Queen's University Belfast. We've been running Living Labs probably informally, but not as a set program. And we've been doing some projects on our CHP where we've actually had our chemistry students involved in using the data and understanding how the CHP works, and they're now testing some technology on it. But some of the feedback we've been getting is, you know, this is really good because it's working with the School of Chemistry, but how can we actually expand this beyond the engineering disciplines, particularly the likes of medicine, where we have a really big research impact in relation to carbon? And I'm just wondering how the people, you know, Dave, Emily and Hassan, have they thought about how you can extend this to other faculties and disciplines which don't kind of naturally fit with environmental sustainability themes?
Thanks very much for that question. It's a really good one, and I think, yeah, I mentioned in my presentation that I am really wanting to try and reach out beyond those sort of what you would expect would be the normal kind of departments to engage with around operational stuff like engineering and architecture. And it's kind of slow. I am finding it slow going. But I was talking to someone from Macquarie University in Australia recently, and they made a really good point about actually they've done a lot of work looking at all of their different courses and disciplines and linking sustainability into every single one, and they actually found there were only 2 courses that they couldn't find some link with, and that gave me real hope to think, okay, I do just need to think a bit broader, a bit more outside the box. But I have been finding when I've spoken, say, to someone in the English faculty sometime last year, it kind of opened up a few opportunities to promote more on the voluntary side for us, but just the nature of their undergraduate course meant that it wasn't going to work at that point for them to take that forward. But I think it's just always being open to having those conversations and approaching new people, and I'm hoping that from that I will be starting to get more engagement. Psychology is one that's opened up to me now, and we've got a couple of projects that are going to be happening this year which we haven't ever done before, so I'm excited about some behaviour change projects coming through.
Dave, would you like to add anything to that question?
Thank you. Yeah, sure. I'm very happy to. Again, similar. So being quite candid, I think initially we had some questions of legitimacy. So we've been doing projects because they made sense. And then as we approach this living lab idea, you know, I'd like to use the analogy of the late great Jonah Lomu, you know, about 6'5", I think he was, and 20 stone, but he still took a telling off from a referee who was 5'6", like he was a big kid. Now, why did that happen? It's because it was felt to be within the rules of the game legitimate for the referee to do so. So some of what we've been exploring and thinking about is that very question of legitimacy as to why a department centered within corporate services group would have the legitimacy to go and try and talk to and direct research and teaching. And that has, you know, so I've been a little bit cautious, but actually, just like Emily was saying, when we've gone and done it, we've found quite open ideas actually about that, so that's been encouraging. I think we've been lucky because Edinburgh Living Lab has already taken us into informatics and design and sociology, so there's a bit of an open door there. I found that things like circular economy are very good for drawing in lots of different disciplines, from the technical engineering disciplines through to design and sociology again, and all kinds of things. The other thing that I think helps is to begin to bring in money. You know, nothing focuses universities' minds, I think, like bringing in money, and Living Lab is a way of trying to possibly have impact through research, but also exploring opportunities in that practical space. That's certainly something we'll be using as a tool to expand as well.
Oh, hello. So my name is Christian Unger, and I'm from the University of Sheffield. And I basically have 2 questions. We basically don't really have an existing living lab, although we have a number of projects that are relevant to operations and that are aiming to reduce carbon emissions. These are usually not coordinated, and basically for that, we, and particularly me, I have founded a carbon neutral university network that is completely volunteering based, that has started to propose projects from students, PhD students, etc., to simply install solar panels, wind farm, the obvious things. So volunteers basically put together a business case, if you like, based on their experience, and we then present it to the university carbon management group. And by doing that the last 1 or 2 years, one thing we encountered a lot were first of all two things, and that I wanted to ask and have your experience with. First of all, transparency is an issue, particularly because we often make the proposals based on no idea what the estates department thinks is financially interesting in terms of, for example, payback time period, and because they have to be forthcoming about their finances a little bit, which they usually is no good communication. It makes it very hard to see if any of the projects are actually at all feasible and which direction they should go. And so my question there is there a good way? I don't really fully understand why they're so secretive about this. It seems to be a corporate thing. Myself, I'm an academic initially, so I like transparency, and it makes it easier to deal with things. So I wonder if there are any solutions in Edinburgh and Cambridge there. And the second thing, I guess Dave already talked about it shortly, is the funding. Because as we are currently not funded at the moment, we have an Achieve More program, which is generally focused on undergrads, which is an interesting thing, but also in development. But currently we do not have any money for Living Lab, let alone actually for any sustainability structure much at the university. So my question is, are there any kind of obvious places one could apply for funding? Obviously we already heard about Santander, but are there other things that are, logical to get things started, and what would be a good amount to start with, for example, like one position, etc. So I guess that's my two questions, and I hope it wasn't too much at all. Thanks.
I can't give too many suggestions on other funding at the moment. That would be an interesting one. On what you were saying about estate management, I guess I'm in a lucky position in that I'm situated within estate management, so I have access to all the different people we might need, and at least in theory. I think sometimes actually say for example with getting data, I find sometimes that can be hard, even being within estate management, because we may not have the access to it is not even open to sort of everyone within estate management. It's held by a particular person or group of people, and so it might not be that they're actually trying to it's not that they don't want to give you the data, but it's just that it's a hard thing to get a hold of and takes time and things like that. And that's definitely a challenge for us sometimes. We've got these different building management systems, and I especially with a non-technical background, sometimes find it's hard to know like who I need to go and talk to, and then how we can get access to it. And there's various things to need to do, but it's kind of always a work in progress. And it's always useful when I've got a specific project I can talk to someone about, and then once they understand it, then that usually means that I can find ways to get something. That's my experience on that.
Thank you.
Happy to chip in. So on transparency, it's a really good point actually, and I don't think we're fully there yet. Personal view, so don't quote me, but make sure it's personal. I think it's completely wrong the way some universities go about treating what is effectively public money funding public data. And some universities kid themselves that they actually are private enterprises going about business, and therefore have all kinds of blankets they want to cover over what they're doing. I don't find that correct. That's a personal view. When you go back to your sort of day job and your actual experience, you have to sort of try and manage that and recognize that there will be some sensitivities around aspects of commercialization of some of the research data, and increasingly some of the energy and other data. So I guess part of it for me is trying to work out and agree the sorts of information up front that will be made available, so that we don't run into difficulties later. So we make a big play on transparency in terms of overall SRS reporting, because we think that's part of the concept. For us would be that social responsibility is a self-imposed duty. In order to effectively demonstrate how you're doing against that, you can't really be untransparent, because it's such a complicated issue with so many parts to it. So we use that as a background to framing the Living Lab conversation. But it varies, so I think we're reasonably transparent about our procurement activities and some of the HR stuff that we can, and waste. But energy remains a challenge, which I think is not so much to do with culture, or as I was talking about a moment ago, but more to do with the fact that our estate is 800,000 square meters and it's got 500 buildings in it, and we simply don't have the data sometimes, so it is a challenge. On funding, I would hope that one of the possible outcomes of this piece of sectoral work the EAUC is doing is the possibilities of drawing together enough support and interest for people to go back to HEFCE or others to talk about whether this is sensible to fund. There certainly seems to be opportunities in the corporate space, although they bring risks at the same time. And then I've been pushing, we think Living Lab is absolutely the sorts of things that a modern curriculum should be doing. This is the sort of stuff that universities spout about what they want students to be doing. More experiential learning, team-based, getting out there, volunteering, and so on. So we've tapped into the various internal pots to do with modernization of teaching or innovative learning week or things like that. So I encourage people to have a think about that possibility too.
So just before we move on, firstly, can I say that if anyone else has any ideas that they'd like to jump in with regarding any of the questions, feel free to do so. Treat this as a discussion. And secondly, just very quickly on that point, just on the back of what Dave built up, I think it's also important to look at the benefits of Living Labs and taking that approach, because many times we can forget the actual benefits that sustainability departments are delivering to the university as a whole. And many of the things that Living Labs do cover are things that universities are currently having issues or troubles or would like to build on, actually. So the idea of benefits to states and operations, the community engagement aspect, as well as the student learning experience and student satisfaction, and delivering a better experience to students. So I think I had the list early on in the second or third slide. I think it would be beneficial for you to have a look at, but there will be a more comprehensive list which is properly backed up by evidence, or hopefully published as part of this research as well, which will try to highlight some of the benefits, and that hopefully will be a better way to clear up expectations as well as draw in more funding.
I have a question. It's David Stuttrell from the University of St Andrews, and I'm wondering whether anyone has defined Living Labs as a wider look at the academic research impact, so that within the operation of the university we are practicing several things that our academics are producing research papers on. They don't know what we're doing and we don't know what they're researching, but we're trying to make a link to understand, is there a way that we can, our ideal is that we end up with a 4-star impact case study for someone who's done research by showing that we as an institution are implementing what they've done as a research, and we are then putting that wider out into the community. So it's really just a question of that definition, rather than take it just from the students, but to actually our academics.
I think that's a really good question, and there's not many cases that I know about in Cambridge so far, although actually I do keep finding that there's little things that pop up where I'm like, oh, that's very Living Lab in style, okay, I better go and have a chat to them, which is great to be able to do. But there's, in the engineering department here, there's recently been a new building put up where the people who are in the building now, their research has been kind of used within that building, and they've now got loads of sensors in there. It's all to do with concrete structures, and they've got loads of sensors in there so that they can be using that data to be going into their future research. So that's quite a nice thing that's come about. I think it took a lot of work to make it happen, and I wasn't personally involved in it at all, but there's one example, and it's something that I would like to do more of.
Can I make a comment? I'm just looking at some of the questions coming in as well. They're just fantastic questions, and I should have said, I don't know if I actually said it, I don't feel that, unlike some of the areas I've been working through, my own thoughts are terribly clear about some of this stuff, and I am still relatively new to the sector. I think on David's question, part of it, for us at least in Edinburgh, is that we are trying to change and modernise the curriculum, and there's a very clear drive now to close this gap between research and students. And that's possibly one way in. I know it's not the academic side, but it's sort of one way into closing some of the gap is to talk about that. The other way is, on the impact side, I guess, is to open it up, as Edinburgh Living Lab is trying to do, to the city, where there doesn't then seem to be a problem of, ref points and so on, because it's public in a way that maybe doing it just internally isn't. We've been thinking about the use of social finance, which might provide a real-life way of then implementing some of the ideas. And the final thing, as I mentioned, is myself and Liz Cooper starting to think about beginning to publish in academic journals if we can, partly to try and draw others into it to see whether there's enough appetite to do a kind of rigorous research thing. I guess 4 stars would, I'd settle for 3 stars to be honest, but trying to draw people in that way too.
Can I quickly add to that?
Hi Hassan, we've had a couple of questions come in from Lucinda and from Simon as well, so if you'd be able to respond to those, that would be great. Thank you.
Of course. I'll get to the questions. I'll quickly add to David's question as well before going on to the other questions about research being published. Now, having done a quick trawl of the journals across many areas such as education for sustainable development, technology, and data, and all these different things, there have been a large number of published articles journal articles on living labs in the year specifically 2015. So last year had been very interesting because there have been a few special issues on living labs. So I think one journal was International Journal for Sustainability in Higher Education, and the Journal for Cleaner Production. So there has been a lot of movement, and this has been across Europe and North America, and we've seen some bits coming out of Southeast Asia, Singapore, and Malaysia as well. So that's interesting to see those kind of wheels turning in other institutions across the world as well, and hopefully something I'll be able to communicate as part of the research as well. So there is potential there. It is being done, and hopefully we can start to think about how we can do it in the UK. So there's a question from Simon Goldsmith. It's as there is often a significant potential relationship between estates and facilities and the academics, how did you set up the systems to ensure everyone was clear as to the expectations and communications, so the ideas moved forward to completion rather than slowly die a death, to put it explicitly? Issues we also have are that our estates team don't want to feel that they could get overwhelmed with requests that are not specific, developed, or could be better coordinated. So Emily, if you could take that first, and Dave, if you could follow up, please.
Yeah, so I suppose that's where I come in our case, which I know not everyone has a full-time person that can work on this stuff in the same way, but I think, so I have, whenever I first meet with whether it's a student or on the operational side or an academic, I set out certain, how it usually works and that kind of thing, and what managing expectations, I suppose, is a key part of it, and then take it forwards I find that it has to change in different ways depending on the nature of the project and how it comes about, and then who is involved. And I suppose because of me being involved, then I'm keeping track of where it's at and what sorts of demands are being made of people within estates, for example, and so then I can take some of that load off them, hopefully, or I can say, if you can direct me where it is, then I can just provide them with this information, that kind of thing. So that's how we get around that. And I'm trying to actually expand how much we're getting project suggestions coming from the operations side, rather than it always coming from like an idea from a student or an academic research area, and that's a work in progress, I suppose. And but again, when I do have, it's just having conversations over tea and coffee, basically, where I tend to be getting opportunities coming up. And again, then it's just being clear about how it would work and that kind of thing, and reassuring them that I'm there to support it all, basically.
Very similar actually to what Emily's just said. I think one of the people listening quietly on the call, Matt Lawson, does a lot of this for us, and so does Liz Cooper. So I mentioned Liz runs an SRS Academic Network, which is one way to develop contacts and share ideas that might be coming ideally from operational people who want a problem solved. So for me, that's always one easy way. That, you know, that somebody wants a problem solved, and then we can do a kind of screening and matching project management, heavy lifting sort of bit of effort so that people get the answer they need, but there isn't a lot of work for them to do. I think in the old days when the department was just setting up, or prior to that, we might have had random emails going from students to us or onto operational colleagues suggesting things may or may not happen. To me, that isn't really going to work in the long run because of the mismatch between people's agendas and what they're interested in and so on. So I think there is a kind of curation, management, project management, expectation setting role for someone, and if you don't do that, then, you know, fine, you'll get some benefits, but I imagine it won't be as much as possible. The other one for me is just one of our core competencies, we say as an SRS department, is being very well connected in the university. And so I think that's true, is just knowing the sorts of people who might be good to solve some of the problems you've got, matched to the sorts of people who've got problems, but also knowing who they are and how they go about things. And as Emily says, sometimes just sorting it out via coffee, or ego management, or providing information in the right format, or just simply declining opportunities because what someone wants to do isn't going to match what's available. I don't think there's any magic to it other than it takes some resource to do it well, would be my comment.
Just to add, you've probably seen in the chat box, Lucinda's just reminded me very nicely about so Oxford had their Carbon Innovation Programme, which ran over the last year, and we are borrowing some of those ideas and examples for the competition that I mentioned that we're launching this coming year. And the idea of that is that it provides a bit more structure around helping students and staff develop solutions that are within the kind of structures we've already got for being able to implement these within the estate. So that will hopefully help to result in, you know, more ideas coming through that are specific to our operational challenges and things like that.
Thanks, Emily. And I do certainly agree with what both Dave and Emily said, that projects coming on from the operations side instead of students asking. Now, there are a couple of interesting places, living labs. One is Princeton, and the other is actually the University of West of England in Bristol. And what they've done is look at the community engagement aspect of that as well, because while linking campus and academia is, operations and academia is central to the living lab, what's equally important is also drawing in community engagement, and this is a tool which can be used as an example and applied in either ways, I think. It's called SkillsBridge, skillsbridge.org, I think, and I think you can Google it, or I'll be able to send a link around after this through the community of practice. Essentially, community engagement groups and NGOs can go on there and post or contact an individual within the university who can post something, a project on there for students to have a look at and bid for. The NUS has Dissertations for Good, which is a very similar project where external organizations post projects and they have a short abstract, and students who are interested can select the project, and they have an opportunity to kind of explore it from the perspective of the operations side rather than their own perspective if taken in the university's environment. So I have another statement from Lucinda, which I think Emily referred to. It's an important thing to consider is impact factor. The Living Lab is great for facilitating MSc, MBA, and PhD projects, and sometimes staff pet projects, but senior academics are interested in the impact factor. We have a range of projects that we have done over the last few years, and whilst I would like to publish them through routes such as Nature Energy, they will never be published because the academics' priorities lie elsewhere. So what we're finding is that the projects need to be big enough and off the wall enough that the academics see the big picture and big funding opportunities for them. At this point, they buy into it. However, at this point, it then creates a difficult dynamic where the project can last in excess of a year and may not result in a solution that can be installed on the estate. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're still negotiating the relationship between academia and operations, to complete the sentence. Emily and Dave?
Yeah, well, the only thing I would add, thanks Lucinda for adding that, just to say, please, other people do share your own experiences, because I think this is a learning opportunity for all of us. I'm certainly keen to hear how other people get around some of the challenges I was talking about earlier. The only thing I would add to that is, that one of our big challenges is sometimes, you can get a great project idea coming up, but if it's a case of changing something about a building or trialing something that's new, there's always a challenge around, you have, those conversations around what then the risk of that is for how it will affect the building operations, and is that going to result in a year or two's time, our sort of facilities team having to do a heck of a lot of work to put something right or change something about it. And I think the reason it worked in that case I discussed before about the engineering building, the new engineering building where there's a research team who've got some of their stuff embedded, was partly because it's them that are in that building, so they were willing to take that risk and we could have that conversation. So that is a big challenge sometimes with the bigger picture stuff, I suppose.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. I thought this is, it's worthy of kind of research itself, I think. I think it's an excellent point. I can be glib about it, but I am serious that one way around this is to just bring in money. And so, actively start scanning for opportunities that make sense because they are operational and research at the same time, and supply chains is a great one there. So we are looking hard at what, at electronics or food or clothing or other places where there is a real need to do some research involving either academics or students, and then the answer would actually be something that people at the other end are waiting for. I think there is something there. I think that where you have an acceptance of a very long timeline because it's important enough to the Director of Estates or the Director of Procurement, then you can overcome this mismatch of timing and so on. So there is this change formula people might have heard of, that D multiplied by V multiplied by F is greater than R. R is resistance to change, and you ain't going to get any change unless you have these other things adding up to more than it. And the three things are dissatisfaction with the status quo. If your Director of Estates or someone else thinks everything's absolutely dandy, then trying to get them to join 5-year programs of research isn't going to get you very far, I don't think. But if there is a sense of dissatisfaction and something they want sorted, and then you come along with the second part of vision, some sort of vision of where you want to go, and then the bit that I think often academics fall down on, which is first steps, some realistic set of first steps. So you design your research program to give answers that aren't just 4 years away. So I used to run research programs for the Environment Agency in Scotland, and I would pose the question to my academic friends in the universities who would say, oh, that's 7 years and £1 million. And I would say, right, well, I need it in 4 months and I've got 10K. And the ones who were able to answer the initial question were the ones who might then be able to work with me. And so I think there's something there too, but I wouldn't want to belittle that there's a sort of a real sort of problem of, to give another example, I was trying to improve regulation for companies and cut 1,000-page application forms down to 7. But I debated it with an academic who said because we didn't know what the meaning of better was and we didn't know what the meaning of regulation was, we could make no progress. And I don't think that discussion is terribly helpful, and I don't know quite always what the answer is to that.
Thanks, Dave. Do keep your questions coming in. I've had another comment from Lucinda. She was responding to you, Dave. She says, this usually works best around, we're busy building industry partnerships to fund some of these projects. This usually works best around R&D that will allow industry partners to profit in the future from the project. And one from Simon again. One issue we've had is that the time frame for our operational staff is very different than for our academics. Projects need delivering quickly. Academics take time to plan and then undertake the research that may require a different lens than the project allows. So how do you align these, especially where there's potential cost and risk? Dave, you already, Dave already touched on this. If you want to finish off talking about this, Dave, and then we can go back to Emily.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'll add too much. I think partly where you have a recognized need for change. So if the director of estates thinks that the future of his estate or her estate is low carbon, positive technologies that are cheaper to run with better health impacts and less overall impact, then there's surely an opportunity there. And yes, there'll be some short-term wins that you probably need to secure in order to get that credibility. Part of it for me is credibility, really. If you manage to learn the director of estates as someone important in the university to listen, and then you have no sense of credible first steps, and you just talk about huge amounts of cost and lengthy programs with no obvious return, you don't necessarily get their impact, but their interest. But if you can sort of set out a longer term and a short term, that's one possible way around it. And I had a second point, but I've forgotten, so I'll let Emily give you a better answer.
Definitely not better, but I suppose we've got a different it's the other way around for us because of the fact that our Living Lab program is so focused on student projects more than academic, the larger research projects at the moment. We actually find that sometimes the student timescales for their research is a lot less than the projects that are happening, because we've got a lot of construction going on in Cambridge at the moment. And that's just about right at the start. That's always kind of is often my first question to all the parties, like, okay, we need to think about timescales, and then we have to potentially adapt the project according to that or find a way around it. And there's usually something that you can find, but it involves having that conversation to make sure it works. And then the next risk that often comes up is that timescales potentially on that operational side, they change, and because things come up and things take longer. And again, that's about managing the expectations with the student at the start to say, you need to be aware that these things might happen, so we need to get some plans in place for if that does, and how are you going to work around it. Again, just those conversations usually mean we can find solutions that might not be as ideal as as they could be, but means that it doesn't then cause failure of the project or whatever.
Well, while you guys are thinking about more questions, I have a couple of others which I'd like to put to Emily and Dave at this stage. So the first one is, what is your biggest challenge at this moment in time?
Okay. Sorry, Hassan, just before I answer that, I'm just going to go back. I've just seen that Pearl has replied to say we're having this problem too. A good example is our biodiversity initiatives that are perfect for our conservation degrees but would need monitoring during the summer. This meant we missed out this year but have been able to plan a bit better for next year now. What is my biggest challenge? What is my biggest challenge? I listed a few, didn't I? I'm trying to pick one. Right now, I suppose, because I'm just about to start thinking about putting together our next annual report, it's thinking about all the projects that have happened over the last year and previously. What can I be pulling out in terms of impacts and outcomes? and I'm finding that I'm having to resort to doing more of the anecdotal and case study type stuff rather than what I would have liked to do, which is getting some real figures in there. I'll hopefully have some figures, but yeah, it's definitely more on the anecdotal side. So if anyone has any thoughts on that or ways they've got around that, I'd be really grateful to hear.
Can I cheat by saying my single challenge has got 4 parts? The data one, which frustrates me, we've all been talking about it, we'd like to have much better data-rich environment for some of the questions and challenges we want to pose. Second one is scalability. I just felt a bit overwhelmed by hearing John Robinson speak about what the scale of what he'd been managing to do. And I think our department in the university has done some great stuff. But we were talking about how, increase that by an order of magnitude. If you say you want to have an impact on student satisfaction scores or the nature of the curriculum and so on, but you're taking 10 placements a year, but you've got thousands of students, it's a pretty marginal impact. So I'm interested now in scalability, which means my third challenge is budget, as to whether this can just become a generic structural thing rather than an individual thing done in certain parts. And then I think the fourth one is probably a little sense of loneliness maybe, which is why I'm really glad that the EAUC are doing the piece of work. I want to understand, I'm slightly uncomfortable answering lots of questions because I don't really know the answers to many of the points you're making, and I think a big challenge for me is to join a larger range of people who are also thinking about this and learning from the sector and from internationally, rather than thinking that we've got to figure all this out for ourselves. So that one, data, budget, and scalability.
Thanks, Dave. I may have a partial addition to your scalability, though not the other 3 big ones at this point in time. But the one regarding scalability, I was actually having a discussion with John when he's going to be talking about this in much more depth and much more accurately. But he's now shifted to the University of Toronto, and he's also an adjunct professor at the Copenhagen Business School. You will have all heard of UBC's story many times over by now. So one thing I didn't want John to speak about is UBC, because it can many times overwhelm people, especially when presented with such an advanced example of a living lab which is thoroughly integrated into the university with thousands of students participating. So one thing I did put to him is that you have to talk about Copenhagen Business School, because that's just starting out as a living lab, as well as the University of Toronto. So one of his key challenges is, well, I don't have any budget at the moment, so can I do this without budget? And I'll just leave you there. So to try to convince you to come back on I think it's the 26th of October, to hear John speak about this challenge of his in terms of how he's trying to overcome the budget issue. So yeah, my next question is to everyone else. So for those of you who've been sitting there listening to us, I'd encourage you to participate either by typing in if you can't speak, or like Lucinda are in an open plan office, or you can send an individual message to any one of us or the host as well. So the question is, what would be particularly useful for you from this research project in terms of outcomes, the EAUC research project? So I have a couple of comments. One is from the University of Warwick, which is currently doing some of this work without budget, from David. If you have anything to add to that, we welcome that, David. And also engaging a little bit with business from the West Midlands to trial their technology on campus. And one from Simon Goldsmith to assist in the development of guidelines. I think this is directed towards the research project, helping to meet expectations and also examples from many disciplines as to how it can be applied and the outcomes that can be achieved. One of the challenges we are currently facing in terms of the project is how to kind of portray the models of living labs, because and it's something which I have been trying to think about, and also have had advice from John Robinson about thinking of not living labs as different models, but thinking of the campus as a living lab as one model, which involves many different aspects to it. So rather than many different living labs, for example, one engages with community, the other one doesn't. So Cambridge is a good example. It does campus and student work really, really well, but Cambridge doesn't have a community engagement aspect. On the other hand, Edinburgh has done very good work on community engagement and has done some work on students and researchers linking in with the operation, so a bit of everything. So the idea behind this is to think of living labs as a progression, or having a series of stages. So it could start off with, let's say, the easiest thing for you to do is to have a series of projects where students link in with the campus operations. And then perhaps the students are a gateway for the researchers to be included in there, or vice versa. It could happen the other way, where researchers are included in campus operations doing some research work, and then they find an avenue to include some students as part of the courses they're running. So just thinking about different ways that we could approach the living lab model. One from Lucinda, a clear definition of living labs and how it can link in with all the other schemes the university does, like Green Impact. Thanks. I hadn't thought about linking in with other schemes, so I think that will be one good point to consider. Dave and Emily, do you have anything you'd like to add so far?
Not so far. This is great seeing all of these coming in.
I wonder whether there's an opportunity to link it to the mapping exercise that you're doing as well. I don't know if you were planning to, Hassan, the kind of Life Plus map as a specific component that people are rated against. We funded from Edinburgh some work, another piece of work with EAUC to think about the next steps for the governance document for leaders, you know, the one that came out last year. And again, I wonder whether adding living lab, I can't remember if it's in there to be honest, but strengthening perhaps some of that stuff about living lab for leaders, really, to try and get leaders on board as to why what apparently might look like small-scale efforts from a bunch of people in the sustainability bit have got something to do with their strategic objectives about the nature of the university that they want. And in due course, trying to get, in Scotland it would be Scottish Funding Council, but I guess down in England it would be HEFCE or others who might have money or influence to be buying into this agenda, and eventually by having a sector-wide considered view about some of this stuff, possibilities.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, the sustainability mapping project has been my remit so far as well, but it's been in the making in terms of the report. So once the report comes out, hopefully we'll have positive feedback from it. We've had positive feedback during the annual conference, and given we get positive feedback from the report, what will follow is an update of the live tool, and we'll be thinking about living labs whilst that update is going on as well, to try to link in everything together into this whole institution approach, which you always hear from the EAUC. There's a message from Rachel. A useful outcome would be some guidance for academics on the benefits of undertaking research projects on campus. Often it's the senior academics who are crucial to the success of these types of projects. Okay, thanks for that. I think this ties in with a comment that I think Lucinda made earlier as well on academics being attracted to larger projects. I think it's something we'll have to think about and navigate in the upcoming project as well. There's a message from Matthew as well. Guidance and a set of tools would be helpful. Shared learnings through specific case studies would be of interest, especially on the approaches used by institutions to implement a living lab approach, including partnerships with industry. Thanks for that, Matt. I think, yeah, the main thinking behind this is to actually develop a practicable outcome which institutions can implement, and thinking about the different ways of progression in terms of bringing in the community engagement aspect as well. So it's important to include the public, private, and NGO sector as well, because that's something we've really seen as a major success at UBC, and it's something which has been important to the implementation of the living labs campus as a living labs into the city as a living lab approach. So there's another one from Christian. The case studies will be great to explain benefits to estates and researchers. Then the next steps are how to scale these studies and what are the core projects. Obviously, there are major themes that perhaps several projects can be combined via the EAUC and answer the big questions, and then aim to publish this together as a big paper /S. Yep, of course. And one from Lucinda again, a collaboration platform to make sure we're not replicating work. And Matthew mentioned it also, it would be good to know how students in other institutions gain recognition through undertaking as extracurricular living lab work. And finally, one from Lucinda, I think it is, can we centralize funding from large companies and create a bidding system, or would that add unnecessary paperwork? How would this interact with the competitive nature of academics? And would large companies or funding bodies be biased towards particular institutions? So great questions and comments. Before I let you jump in for the final 5 minutes, Emily and Dave, I'd just like to add that these are all great suggestions. We are thinking about case studies, and we'll be taking on board these suggestions to make sure they're represented in the research as well. We are hopefully looking to bid for funding for running a series of pilot projects in phase 2, and looking for interest from several universities. Edinburgh has already expressed a lot of interest and dedicated resources towards it. Cambridge, Emily has also been very helpful in terms of convening this and dedicating time and resources to this project as in-kind resources to this project as well. So we are looking for expressions of interest in terms of excuse me, institutions who would like to participate in phase 2, and really, as Dave said, take this and demonstrate to the sector and demonstrate to HEFCE and the Scottish Funding Council that these are important aspects that we do need to bear in mind, and perhaps look towards large-scale funding for these. Dave and Emily.
I just wanted to say thank you all for joining. My head is completely buzzing with all of these different ideas, and I think it really shows that the Living Lab concept, we're in Cambridge, we're quite focused on just the student projects at the moment, but that scalability that Dave was talking about is such a key thing that I want to be thinking about a bit more. And like Dave, I wanted to echo his comments earlier. Like, I'm really happy to be in this group of people now, to be sharing these different experiences. We're all in slightly different situations with what we're doing with it, but I certainly don't feel like yeah, I've got probably more questions than I have answers, I think. So I hope we can all keep in touch and keep the conversation flowing.
Well, firstly, yeah, thanks as well to people. I draw some confidence from people thinking that what we're saying is useful, that we're on the right lines, and that it chimes with some people. I mean, so. Really, I've been kind of looking to what Cambridge have been up to for the last couple of years. So I guess we're all learning from each other. I think if I had any advice, I always go on about this, but this is change management stuff. So if people are trying to get something going, think about legitimacy and why yourselves rather than the researchers or the other operational staff. Be clear to some senior colleagues why this matters, why there's a problem to be solved, how it fixes their other problems that they've got, which they've always got multiple problems. And to try and find, someone as good as John Robinson or something to act as a champion. Find a professor maybe who can speak up for this stuff. The one extra thing I want to toss in before I shut up is I wonder whether there's an international dimension as well. We've got all these students who need projects. In Edinburgh, at least, we want to give them an international experience as part of their degree if we can. Why not explicitly think about an international angle to some of this, where we're joining up some of the opportunities we have with the people we've got studying with us with some genuine problems in other parts of the world that have less capacity, less resource. But overall, I found it really helpful and looking forward to next steps. Thanks.
Can I just quickly throw something in, because Dave mentioned it, the international perspective. It so happens that our director from the Grantham Center is at Cornell University, and I took a lot of the information from there and learned basically about Second Nature, which is the American program for carbon reductions in universities there. And I know that Scotland in particular has used that to build their program a little bit. But in England itself, or I don't know, there wasn't so much connection, but I believe there's probably a lot of scope to connect with Second Nature. Indeed, I've spoken with some of them, and they seem to be really helpful and interested. So if we could get some travel funding, for example, that would probably be a very motivating activity for students or EAUC staff or something to visit some of their universities, who seem to have sometimes significantly more funding for things. Just as a last point, yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Kristen. Seth, would you like to?
Yes, yeah, I'll be happy to. Yeah, I think we're going to have to wrap things up for now, because people have to get away, because we said we'd finish at past. Yeah, thank you very much for joining today's webinar, and thank you very much, Emily, David, and Hassan. Been really helpful. So if you're interested in finding out more about the Living Labs, you can join our community of practice. So if you want to join, then just email us, so info@eauc.org.uk. And you're more than welcome to invite others, or to ask other people if they would like to join as well. We'll be hosting another Living Labs webinar on Wednesday, the 26th of October, with Professor John Robinson. We'll send a link with more information close to the time. In a follow-up email, and we'll also be sending sort of a post-webinar survey shortly, just to get your feedback on how the webinar's been for you. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to let everyone get away now so they can get back to what they need to do. But yeah, thank you for joining us.